Right, so I'd just like to welcome everyone here to today's Hard Talk HR webinar with Michael Chaskalson on the Mindful Executive. My name is Ben Churchhouse and I am the co-producer of the HR Congress, and we're glad to present this webinar to you today. So before we get started, I've just got a couple of housekeeping issues to go through. Firstly, the webinar will be available to all attendees on demand following the conclusion. So we are recording it and it will be made available to you following. So if you miss anything for any reason, don't worry, we'll have it to you. All people who have registered for the webinar will get a copy. So if you miss out on the live recording, hopefully you'll be able to hear this in playback soon. So again, I'd just like to welcome Michael to the floor today, and we're going to go through things quite basically, on off the cuff, so to speak. Try and keep it not too serious. So I'd just like to sort of get started with sort of the webinar focus for today. And the main focus is to discuss the pressures that decision makers and organizations are sort of subject to understand how mindfulness training appropriately pitched can help us work more effectively with our minds and mental states, and learn what mindfulness is, what forms the training usually takes, and what outcomes may be expected from it. So keep these sort of general ideas in mind throughout the webinar, and hopefully you'll be able to learn a little bit from it. So how to interact today. As you can see on your screen, there's a little question box there. You can enter a question for our staff, and they will be quite happy to answer your queries in the text box. You can also enter a question for Michael, and we will read out a couple of questions at the end of the webinar, time depending. Obviously, we probably won't be able to go through all of the questions that you might have, so please bear with us in this regard. But we'll try and pick a few out for Michael to answer, and so hopefully we'll get some satisfactory responses. If you're tweeting, if you use Twitter, if you want to use Twitter, there's a hashtag for the HR Congress down below, so please feel free to tweet with us if you can. So I'd just like to move on. Before we go too much further into the webinar, I'd just like to make a quick announcement regarding the HR Congress, which will be taking place in Brussels on the 28th and 29th of November at the Egg. All webinar attendees are eligible for a 20% discount to the webinar, and there's a coupon code there you can see on your screen. It's called webinar, so please go to www.hrcongress.com to redeem that. We'll be having over 50 speakers from HR professionals from all around Europe, 12 separate areas of HR, with keynotes from Herminia Ibarra, Dave Orick, and other fantastic speakers from around Europe and internationally. And of course, Michael Chaskalson will also be there with a masterclass on mindfulness. So if you want to join, please check out the website, and be happy to see you there. So I'd just like to introduce your presenter for today. Michael Chaskalson is a leading authority on mindfulness. He's the Professor of Practice Adjunct at Ashridge Executive Education at Holt International Business School. He's the author of 3 books, The Mindful Workplace, published in 2011, Mindfulness in 8 Weeks, 2014, and upcoming The Mind Time in 2017. So without sort of further ado, I'd just like to introduce Michael to you. So Michael, if you're around, we'll take over. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and we'll pass it over to Michael for the presentation. So once again, on behalf of the HR Congress, welcome to the webinar, and I hope you get something valuable out of it.
Great. Hi everyone. Very good to be here. So I want to talk today about the mindful executive, and what are the pressures that people are under at work today. I guess many of you will know all about that, but also how might mindfulness training impact that? What difference can it make? How can it help? So to begin with, I'd like to share this slide. These are mindfulness publications by year, 1990 to 2016. As you can see, they've been just going up and up and up. This is peer-reviewed scientific journals. When I first started doing mindfulness myself, I learned it in Buddhist contexts back in the mid-70s. And I lived for much of my life in full-time Buddhist context in urban in urban meditation centers, rural retreat centers. And right up until 2002, 2003, thereabouts, there was hardly any studies on mindfulness published. But around about that time, there was several randomized control trials published checking out the implications of mindfulness practice, the impact of mindfulness practice on people who suffered from relapsing depression. It was the beginning of mindfulness coming out of the Buddhist context and into the clinical context, subject to really, really methodical research. And that led NICE, the UK's National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, which makes recommendations to our National Health Service. It led them to recommend mindfulness training as a frontline intervention for people who are suffering from relapsing depression. And now, what that meant in 2002, 2003 was a master's program was launched to train clinicians in our National Health Service how best to deliver mindfulness to that population. I joined that master's program. I was the first graduate from it. In fact, I'm the world's first graduate from the world's first master's program in mindfulness. And I taught on it for many years. I was teaching clinicians in our National Health Service, and that led me to teaching executive coaches, and that led me into organizations. And now all my work is teaching mindfulness in organizations. But here's the thing. The stuff that we teach is backed by really sound science. These peer-reviewed publications add up to a significant body of evidence. And it's that body of evidence which means that events like the HR Congress invite someone to talk about mindfulness at their event, because mindfulness training and practice now is no longer a matter of faith. It's no longer something to do with Buddhism. It's not even particularly a matter of opinion. We know from good, hard-edged research that there are significant changes that occur when people engage in regular mindfulness practice. And I'll share some of my own research done with colleagues at Ashridge in this regard during the webinar. So we know at the moment we've got at least good reason for thinking, because of a study published at Harvard fairly recently, that 8 weeks of mindfulness training increases brain gray matter density in areas connected with emotion regulation, cognitive control, perspective taking, for example. There's another suggestion from a Harvard study that 8 weeks of mindfulness training increases the brain's cortical thickness. It's actually measurably thicker in certain parts as a result of 8 weeks of mindfulness training. Another study, this one published at the University of Wisconsin, tells us that with 8 weeks of mindfulness training, you get increased activation in the left prefrontal cortex and reduced activation in the right prefrontal. Left prefrontal activation is connected with approach modes of mind, moving towards things with openness, curiosity, interest. Right prefrontal activation is associated with moving away from things, fear, disgust, anxiety, aversion. And the ratio of left to right activation changes with just 8 weeks of mindfulness training. So there are some huge changes that happen when people begin to work with their minds and their mental states more consciously. Okay, so what is mindfulness? Well, it's a quality of awareness. It's a quality of awareness that comes from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and open-heartedly. And I'll just talk that through. We're paying attention on purpose and in the present moment. And it's really interesting to notice that even as I'm speaking now, your attention's wandering, folk out there in webinar land. And I'm not taking this personally. It's just how things are. It's the way the world works. It's the way our minds work. Microsoft published some research a little while back, 2015, I think, suggesting that The adult attention span developed world currently around about 8 seconds. And Microsoft said that's not very good because goldfish can do 9. Now, I don't think that's particularly good science, although it's a good joke. You know, we can't really measure and compare the attention span of a goldfish with a human attention span. But here's the rub. Last time Microsoft measured, which was back in 2000, we were doing 12. So the human attention span, they measured around about that time at around 12. By 2015, it was down to 8. And that's a significant decrease. And I put that down to the use of mobile devices, the widespread use of mobile devices. They're fracturing our attention. And this is not good because we know from other research that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. That the more your mind wanders, the less you're likely to report yourself as being happy at the moment, the less you're likely to actually be experiencing a reasonably good well-being. So wandering mind's an unhappy mind, and our minds are wandering more and more and more, probably due to mobile devices. And the good news, on the other hand, is that we can do something about this. We can do a little bit of training that'll help us to place our attention where we want it to be and keep it there fairly easily a bit more often. Now, when you go home this evening from wherever you are and someone asks you, well, what did you do at around about, I don't know, 4:15, British summertime today, you won't say, oh, well, I was listening to this guy talking about mindfulness on a webinar for about 5 seconds, and then I started to think about a problem on my desk, and I was thinking about that for about 8, 9, 10 seconds, and then I came back to the webinar, I was listening to that for a bit, 5 or 6 more seconds, and then I just checked my messages to see how things are doing, and then I came back to the webinar, and I kind of caught up, and I listened to this guy talking for about 9 seconds, 10 seconds, and then I started to think about my journey home this evening and how that was. But this is what's happening. All our minds wander. The story we have about paying attention in a consistent way is a kind of back reading. Our minds wander. And if they wander a bit less, we're more effective and we're happier, which is good news. And then there's the question of mindfulness being open-hearted. When you're mindful, you have an open-hearted attitude. This attitudinal element of mindfulness is really, really important. Part of it means that we allow what is the case to be the case. We adopt a more allowing attitude, letting what is here be what is here. Because much of the time we're trying to avoid what is actually going on. We kind of wish it wasn't like this. If only I wasn't like this. If only they weren't like this. If only that hadn't happened, then everything would be okay. If I was that bit richer, if I had a slightly better house, if they hadn't done this to me, then it would all be okay. If that person wasn't on my team, then it would all be okay. Just not true, folks. It is what it is. You can't go back in history and change things to make them different. So what has happened has happened. What's here is what's here. When you're mindful and allowing, you allow what is the case to be the case. And when you can let what is the case be the case, then you have some choice. So you can go, okay, it's like this. This is what's happened. This is what's here. Now, how am I going to be with this? What am I going to do about this? What's the best outcome we can get from this place? This also means allowing other people to be themselves, allowing you to be yourself, and treating things with just that bit much more kindness. So when we're mindful, we pay attention on purpose and in the present moment, and we adopt this allowing, slightly kinder attitude to things. And here's the good news. We can, all of us, without very much hard work, increase our level of mindfulness just a little bit. If we can increase it by, say, 10%, maybe 15%, that will make a really significant difference to the way our lives work out. Fabulous. So it's available. A little bit of mindfulness training, you can make a real difference. So you could have your mind full, or you can be mindful. And this slide shows the difference between two people's experience. Although they're, ostensibly in the same place, having the same experience, the person on the right, the guy with the elbow patches, is just there enjoying the view. The guy on the left is in the same place, seeing the same view in theory, but he's just preoccupied by a head full of stuff. There's just stuff going on there, endless chatter. And some of you might know what that's like, when you're standing waiting for a train or a cab or a bus or whatever, you've got nothing particular to do. You haven't reached for your phone and you're just standing there and your head is chattering away, talking to you about your experience, thinking forward about stuff to come, thinking backwards about stuff that's been, commenting on what's going on, chatter, 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 chatter. The mind is really, really full. And what these two different guys are experiencing here are different brain systems activated. The guy on the right is experiencing what's known as the experiential network, a set of related brain systems that are just delivering his present moment experience, is mainly his sense experience, and just he's there with what's going on right here, right now. The guy on the left is experiencing what's known as the default mode network, the default mode network. So he's just chundering away. It's a set of related brain systems that deliver the experience we default to much of the time. Now, it's possible to shift from the default mode network to the experiential network without very much difficulty. And if you'll bear with me, I could lead you in a guided practice that will give you some sense of what it's like to do that. So if you're up for this and you're able to just put 2 or 3 minutes aside for this, we might have a go at doing that right now. So here's how it goes. I'd invite you to look around you, wherever you are right now, and select an area of whiteness, any single area of whiteness. And just let your gaze rest on that area of whiteness. And beginning to just explore gradations, perhaps, across that area of whiteness. There may be very subtle changes across that area. There's no single uniformity in whiteness. It's often accompanied by shadows, by glare, by different phenomena. And now choosing another area of whiteness, a different one, and beginning to explore what's actually going on in this area of whiteness, noticing how it's different from the previous area of whiteness. They're very, very subtle differences. And now finding another area of whiteness. If you're looking at a screen, it may be helpful to come away from that screen and just exploring the new area of whiteness, seeing how there are changes across it. Really noticing. Now, letting go of the visual sense, moving to the sound space, and just for a few moments exploring what's here in the sound space that you're in right now. Noticing any buzzing, any humming, any sound of traffic, any sound of machinery, sounds from your own body or other people's bodies. Just noticing what's here. Letting go of attention to the sound space, moving your attention into your body and noticing the sensations that occur where your feet meet the floor. So just feeling feet in contact with floor. And feeling body in contact with chair, noticing the sensations there. And then bringing that exercise to a close, I hope you'll have had some experience now of the shift from the default mode network to the experiential network. And you'll have some sense of the kind of calm or relaxation that can come with that. Although mindfulness isn't about calm, it's not about relaxation, but it is about coming, in part at least, about coming over and over again back to the experiential, just being here now, open, able to pay attention, just in this moment, present. When I do this experiment or this experience in groups, I very often hear people tell me afterwards that they feel more calm. And if I'd come into the webinar and said, right, everyone, just calm. I want everyone to calm. Please, right now, calm. That would have been very much harder. You can't easily do that, although that's the way we often talk to ourselves. I should just be calm. What we're doing there, by the way, is just activating our threat networks, which produce the opposite of calm. So you can be mindful, or you can have your mind full. I want to talk now about some research I did with colleagues at Ashridge, Executive Education, where we looked at the impact of 8 weeks of mindfulness training on a bunch of senior business leaders. I'll share a link to some of that later. And this is what we're interested in. We read around a lot of the literature on leadership in the 21st century, and this piece from the McKinsey Quarterly really sums up the sort of thing that we were coming upon. That leaders in the 21st century are leading in an age of upheaval and having to cope with an enormous pace of change. They have to stay physically and mentally fit to stay on top of all of this. And at the same time, leadership is public and 24/7. They're always under scrutiny. You say something in a meeting somewhere and it's tweeted the next moment and 500 people read about it. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the social media are making what we do very, very public. And it's really important that leaders are able to be under scrutiny, be transparent under scrutiny, and are able to communicate and connect with people. It's also really important that they can make decisions in the conditions of uncertainty that are all around us, and that they're able to allow others to challenge and to air multiple perspectives. So what we thought all of this added up to is, does mindfulness training impact a leader's capacity for resilience, collaboration, and for leading in complex conditions? That's what we believe are the 3 key capacities called for to manage and to lead in the 21st century. Resilience, the ability to collaborate, and the ability to make decisions in complex conditions. And I think that's not just leaders, by the way, that's all executives, that's everyone in the workplace today. There's so much demand on us all. We need to be resilient, we need to be able to work with others, and we need to be able to navigate this ever-increasing complexity. So, does mindfulness training make a difference there? If it does, how does it do it? And we wanted to know, what are leaders' experiences of practicing mindfulness? So we recruited 57 business leaders. We divided them into 2 groups. There was an experiment group, a waitlist group, who were the control group. We gave them 8 weeks of mindfulness training with a leadership framing and interventions, and we got them to do home practice every day. We set them mindfulness practices to do at home every day. We asked them to do 20 minutes of mindfulness practice every day. As you'll hear later, they didn't always do that. But what they did determined the outcomes they got. We measured quantitative data. We did a customized 360. We also measured anxiety, empathy, mindfulness, resilience, and we did a post-program survey. And we collected a lot of qualitative data. We recorded our participants talking in small groups throughout the process. We gave them small voice recorders, and whenever they got together in small groups to talk about how they were finding the program and how it was impacting on their leadership, they recorded that. We transcribed that, and that gave us 27 hours of transcribed data, which we then broke down into 300 odd codes and crunched all of the data. We did interviews with them at the end of the program. We did conference calls and did a post-program survey. And this is what we found. In quantitative terms, when participants engaged in mindfulness practice of more than 10 minutes a day, there were significant increases in their resilience, their capacity to collaborate, their agility in conditions of complexity, their overall mindfulness, and their empathy. This is the extent to which they experienced those three outcomes after 12 weeks. So pretty much 80+% of them thought that to some extent, to a great extent, or to a very great extent, there were increases in their ability to manage complexity, to collaborate, and to stay resilient. That's after 12 weeks. So this is the sort of thing they said. In terms of resilience, there's no question but that it's helped me personally. It does help my stress in that you become aware of what your body's doing at any one moment. And that's very much a product of what's going on in your thoughts and your emotional reactions to those. That's nice. Another thing was, well, you make a kind of conscious decision rather than everything just sort of crashing around you. It's like, well, everything can wait. Let's get it back into perspective. You become more choiceful. You can put things in perspective once more. So you become more resilient. Collaboration. This is a lovely thing someone said. I tend to talk at 1,000 miles an hour. I have an agenda that's 30 points long, and I've been exhausting to be around when we've got a lot to do. And I've really made a conscious effort to slow down and take the time of not so much to focus on the task, but to recognize that there's a person in front of me and they're having their own experience of this stuff. And complexity. Someone said, well, previously I shied away from complexity. Now I approach problems after taking a deep breath or three with openness and curiosity. I approach problems and issues rather than running away from them or ignoring them. Another person said, I'm not noticing my ability to deal with complexity increasing in terms of problem solving or finding solutions or ways through. It's more that I'm less stressed by not having immediate solutions, and I'm better able to reflect and to wait for a solution to arise. So this is how we sum all of that up. What our participants learned is that they became more allowing. As I was saying earlier, allowing is an important element of mindfulness training. You let what is the case be the case. You bring a bit more kindness to yourself, to others, to the situation you find yourself in. They were finding themselves getting more interested in. They got better at doing inquiry and looking into what's here, curious about themselves and their own experiencing, curious about other people and their experiencing, curious about what's going on in the system and in the world around them. And they developed meta-awareness. Meta-awareness is really, really key. What this is it's a state of being able to step ever so slightly back from your present moment experience and to see it as what you're experiencing. I'll give you an example. It's kind of like the difference between simply being irritated and noticing that you're having irritable thoughts. You get the sense of that? If you're commuting on the underground in London, as some of us do from time to time, at 5:30 p.m. it can be hot, crowded, steamy down there. if you feel as if just another person gets onto the carriage where you're standing with backpacks pushed into your face and people shoving you from behind, you're just going to scream because this is getting really, really intolerable. And you start to say things to yourself like, God, in the evenings, they stink of body odor. In the mornings, they stink of aftershave. This is really unbearable. I can't bear this. This is terrible. It's intolerable. And that's one way of being there. Another way of being there is to go, wow, I'm having such irritable thoughts. I'm really so irritated. Wow. That is slightly more meta-aware. That moment of meta-awareness, of being able to step a little bit apart from the situation and to notice what's going on. So we found that when these three came together, when meta-awareness came together with this allowing attitude and with this spirit of inquiry, then people were better able to respond. It opened up this space where they could respond rather than react to what was happening around them. That in turn increased their capacity for emotion regulation. They're better able to regulate their own emotions. It increased their levels of empathy, more empathic with others. They're better able to focus, keep their attention where they wanted it to be a little bit longer. It made them more adaptable to changing circumstances. And they became better at perspective taking. Perspective taking is where you can see that the way you see things is just your perspective, and you recognize that others too have their perspective. And you maybe try out different perspectives. Well, I'm kind of seeing it like this right now, but what would it be like if I saw it like that? And I recognize that this person sees it differently. So what's it like to negotiate between our two perspectives so that we come up with a shared perspective, perhaps? So perspective taking is really, really important outcome. What we found that when all of that came together, people showed themselves to be more resilient. They spoke about being better in various elements of collaboration. And they talked about being better able to navigate and to make decisions in conditions of complexity. That showed up if they did 10 minutes or more of mindfulness practice every day. Really, really simple. And that, by the way, is less than 1% of the average executive's waking life today. It's not a massive ask, just 10 minutes of mindfulness practice each day. And at the end of this, I'll share a slide where you can download some of the audio instruction that we used on the course to guide people in their mindfulness practice. So if you could do that for 10 minutes or more a day, it can make a real difference to your life at home and your life at work. It really is life-changing, this stuff. So what we found is we spoke about this as learning to aim. That's what people were learning on our training. That's what we think mindfulness practice well taught, and it does need to be well taught, folks. It's not the same as just getting in someone who does yoga or someone who once went on a meditation retreat to come and teach meditation. We're beginning to set up standards in the UK and across Europe for the kind of mindfulness training that's driven the massive research outcomes that we see. And this is very, very specific forms of mindfulness training. But when people do that, they learn to aim, they learn allowing, they learn this allowing attitude. They learn inquiry, they get more curious about their experience, more curious about what's happening inside them and around them. And they develop meta-awareness. And when you can aim in that way, when you can experience greater levels of allowing, inquiry, and meta-awareness, that's life-changing. So what happens over the course of developing those capacities is you really start to build new neural pathways. You're engaging in processes which change the way your brain is shaped, it's wired, and the way the different elements connect up with each other. You're rewiring your brain, engaging in 10 minutes of regular mindfulness practice. each day. So here's a guy typically doing a mindfulness practice, a bit of audio guidance on his headset, and it really helps to use, by the way, noise cancelling headphones if you're going to do this. And he's just listening to some mindfulness instruction, audio instruction for a meditation, doing it on his commute. Several of the people on our program found that on their commute was the best time to engage in the practices. A large body of people found that first thing in the morning was the best time to do it. Some people found when they got home from work before getting on with other parts of the evening, that was a good time. There were some people who did it last thing at night, but if they'd had any alcohol with a meal, or if they were very tired, they tended just any case to fall asleep. So the last thing at night, folks, our recommendation to them was, well, if you're falling asleep, maybe do this another time as well. So if you're going to engage in a mindfulness practice, my suggestion is you find the time that works for you, and try and get some support from friends, from colleagues, from family. Let people know what you're up to, and try to find some place where you can go each day to get yourself just 10, 15, 20 minutes of space where you can engage in some regular mindfulness practice. And that can make a really significant difference to the way you experience life. So here are a few books I've written. Mindfulness in 8 Weeks is a guide through an 8-week practice. Mind Time's coming out in March. That's based on the research we did at Ashridge. I wrote that with my colleague Megan Rates. The Mindful Workplace back in 2011 is about bringing mindfulness into work. And Mindfulness for Coaches is out next month. If you're interested in doing any guided meditations, do feel free to go to that URL and help yourself. There's audio downloads and podcasts, really easy to get hold of and to use. If you want to know more about our study, you can go to that URL and find out more. And if there's anything I can do to help you, there's my email address. Do drop me a line. I'm always happy to hear from people. I think now I'll hand over and perhaps take any questions that there may be out there,
Right.
if there are any.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for the presentation. We do have a couple of questions. I'm just going to, I think we just get the screens ready. There we go. So questions time, there we go. Obviously, I've got access to the questions here. So the first question I have is from Diana. And Diana wanted to know regarding the executive study you did at Ashridge, how were those results that you pulled up on the graph, how were they self-evaluated, or was that a 360 feedback? So maybe a question regarding methodology.
Yeah. So it was both. We did a customized mindfulness 360. And some of our data comes from the 360, and some of it comes from standard self-report questionnaires that are the 5-factor mindfulness questionnaire to measure mindfulness, the interpersonal reactivity index to measure empathy. We used an Ashridge resilience questionnaire to measure resilience, and so on. It's all there in our report, which is freely available, and I've shared the URL to that.
Okay, so yeah, if anyone wants to check out that study, please, I highly recommend you do. I'm assuming the detail is obviously a lot more, the devil is in the detail, so to speak. So we've got a couple more questions coming in, so just bear with me here. Nicholas asks, is there a connection between mindfulness and praying?
Nicholas, that can be. Is there a connection between mindfulness and praying? I think that prayer can be a mindful activity, and certainly you can do your prayer in a mindful way, staying present, staying focused. Whether it has exactly the same outcomes as you get from more formalized mindfulness practice, the mindfulness meditation practices that I've shared on my website, We don't know. And there's not yet been a study that looks at these comparatively. It would be a very, very interesting study. But one thing is for sure, you can engage in prayer mindfully. And it's also very likely, I would say, that certain attitudes to prayer would increase your levels of mindfulness. So it all depends on how you go about this.
And we have another question here from Tim Broadhurst. And Tim asks, is there a connection between sorry, that was the wrong one. Does mindfulness practice require high levels of EQ to appreciate it? And how to influence execs? This is good time spent. He says he can imagine the reaction of some of the execs that he works with. So how do you influence the execs, and what kind of EQ does it, I guess, require to appreciate the nuances of mindfulness?
Well, I work all over the place, bringing this stuff into organizations. And what I find is that people are sometimes skeptical to begin with, but we've had a very quick trot through the science here, and it was very, very brief. But generally, when I'm in front of a group of people, a little bit more time, in a different kind of context, when we talk through the science, people begin to get it. We do a few very, very simple exercises, and people experience change. You see that they don't really like this at the start of the exercise, it was like that at the end of the exercise. That's interesting. So people will often be a little empirical. They'll notice their own experience changing, and that's kind of interesting. So the science very often opens the door, and then experience makes the difference. The thing is this, people may not have massive levels of EQ to begin with, but we do know that if people engage in mindfulness training and practice, that really does raise their levels of EQ. So it's well worth, trying to find ways of bringing it in. I'm very often leading with the science and leading with the performance increase in your performance that may come from it. That can be quite persuasive. Also, just by the way, some very high-profile business leaders these days engage in this stuff.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Just waiting for some responses. We have a few more minutes. Yes, we have one from Steve. And Steve asks, what questions do HR departments ask before implementing your mindfulness programs?
I think something like some of that issue around, how are we going to engage our execs? That I think people will sometimes ask the question, well, is this going to actually disturb people? Because, we know that across any population in the workplace, at least 10% are going to have had some significant mental health issues. And in some segments, that's even bigger. So if people have had or are having mental health issues, how might mindfulness training impact that? Might it impact it adversely? Might it get people sparked up into ways of experiencing that aren't helpful to them? And I try to reassure people that although that may happen to some very few people, in all of my time in delivering this stuff, it's very, 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 very rare. And not doing anything is equally likely to spark stuff up. So if there are people with mental health issues, not offering an intervention like this is not necessarily going to be better than offering it. People will, ask the question around skepticism. I try to reassure them with the science. There's questions around, well, how many people can we roll this out to? And here there's a question of, the difference between depth and superficiality. If you want to do it in depth, then it needs to be face-to-face or in groups. And you can have groups of maybe 25, 30 people at a time going through things with one instructor. If you want to roll it out much more widely, there are apps and you can do online stuff, but then you get much less traction sometimes and much less effective engagement. So there are pros and cons to both of these. Um, of course, there's always questions about finance and how much is it going to cost.
So the usual questions then.
Yeah.
Great. I think we've got one last question here. I think we're probably going to run out of time. I'd just like to sort of add a little bit extra to this question as well from Diana. Is there a difference between how people respond to this practice between, say, an introvert and an extrovert? And maybe if you're looking at the big four personality traits, is there sort of some quantifiable sort of measure between, say, how someone who's very high in conscientiousness does with mindfulness training versus someone who's perhaps maybe more neurotic or someone who's very, to use the word, sort of hyper extroverted. Is there a sort of a difference between this, or do people tend to respond in a uniform way?
I think there may be a difference, but we don't really know. No one, to my knowledge, has studied this in any kind of conclusive way. It does seem to make sense that there might be a difference. For instance, on the Myers-Briggs scale, someone who's more introverted may take to it more readily than someone who's extroverted. But we don't know for sure. When I do groups in the workplace, my experience is that you never know who in the room is going to take to it. Some people take to it more than others, and it's not always clear what kind of personality type is driving the difference. So I don't see a trend myself, but it might be there and it needs to be looked at.
Okay, indeed. I'll slip this one last final question in. So thank you to everyone for attending today and obviously for your questions. I don't think we have too much more time. So one last quick question again from Steve to follow up. Do people look for a specific return of investment or investment numbers? And if so, how do you respond?
It's very, very difficult to quantify the return on investment for this. You just have to work it out for yourself. The thing is this, it's not massively expensive to roll out. And if you can get people to just, give 10% more of their attention at work, for example, or, imagine what that costs across, say, 25 people. If you think about the cost of, 25 people's salary in the course of any year, and think about, well, if you could get 10% more of their attention at the task at any one time, what's that worth? That turns out to be quite a big figure. So although no one's yet, I think, managed to work out the return on investment for this, I don't think it's that difficult to make an economic case for it. If you're talking about people's reduced absenteeism, less stress, less time off for stress, increased focus at work, increased emotional intelligence, I think it's a no-brainer myself.
It sounds to be the case indeed. So, okay, I just want to sort of finish off again by thanking Michael for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope that that all of the attendees of the webinar today got something out of this presentation. Once again, yes, the webinar will be shared with all attendees, whether you joined halfway through or you were here from the beginning. We will be editing briefly the webinar following the conclusion of the webinar today. It is recorded, so you'll be sent a link which you can then access on demand. So if you missed anything, don't worry, we'll have it there for you. And it will be available, I believe, on YouTube or a similar format. So thank you once again for attending. Just a quick reminder about the HR Congress. If you want to take advantage of the coupon code, please do. We'd be glad to have you there in November 28th and 29th in Brussels. Michael Chaskalson will be there, indeed, presenting his Mindfulness Masterclass, as well as a selection of other great speakers. So if you would like to join, please come along, and we'd be happy to see you there. So again, on behalf of the HR Congress, on behalf of the director of the HR Congress, Mihai Nudge, here's his email address in the form you can see on your screen there. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to email him or reach out to us through the website, and we'll be happy to have you there. So again, on behalf of Stanford Global, the organizing company, and the HR Congress, I'm Ben Churchhouse, just wanting to say thank you again for everyone. And thank you to Michael for taking your time to present this fantastic webinar today. It was very insightful, and I'm glad that we were able to have this time and spend that together.